I want to welcome you back to this series that we've been walking through now. I think this is week 5, 6, something like that. And it's called Didn't See It Coming. And we have talked about challenges in life, these things in life that sneak up on people, that blindside them. And they never saw it coming, but they find themselves in these places in life they never imagined they would be. They become this person they never imagined they would become. And they don't know how it happened. And we talked about cynicism, and we talked about compromise and disconnection. We talked about things like irrelevance and pride. This morning we're going to be talking about the danger, the issue of burnout, the issue of burnout. And it's a place in life. I think you've heard the word, I'm sure. It's been around since the 70s. But the word burnout, as we're using it today, is this place in life where a person is physically and emotionally and mentally and relationally just spent. They're at the end of themselves. And I understand everyone experiences a season of stress in life. We all do, right? But this is something beyond that. This is an extended season of stress in life that is increasing and doesn't seem to have relief to it. Burnout happens when we have been going at a really hard pace, running really fast for a long period of time, and it catches up to us, and we are spent in every way. People who get to this place of burnout, they experience this weird emotion of numbness. Yes, it's kind of like depression, but it's this unusual form of it where it's just everything's gone numb. People who get to a place of burnout just generally feel dissatisfied with everything in their life. And it's not a place anyone ever wants to end up in. No one gets up in the morning and sets that as the goal for their day or the goal for their life, and yet it happens to people all the time. They find themselves in this place where they're just spent, and they're wondering, how did this happen? How did I get here? As we talk this morning, I want you to imagine that you've signed up for a safety course on how to properly use a power tool. Let's say like how to use a table saw. And you've signed up for this class, and you go to the class, and when you walk in the room, you notice that the guy who's teaching the safety course on how to properly use a table saw is missing a finger. That's interesting. That could have happened in a number of ways, but he's very honest, and he says, guys, I just want you to know up front, I cut my finger off with this table saw. At that point, before he says anything else, most of us in the room would come to one of two conclusions. Number one, we would say in our mind, I'm not listening to a single word this guy has to say about safety with the table saw. The guy cut his finger off. The second conclusion that you could come to would be this. You're going to lean in and you're going to say, I am going to really pay attention to what this guy has to say about safety using a table saw, because clearly he understands what could happen if you don't pay attention to these safety tips. He is clearly invested in this topic. I feel this morning like that guy who is teaching the safety class on the proper use of a table saw, and I'm missing a finger. And what I mean by that is over 20 years of ministry, there's been tons of people along the way, all along the way, who have said to me, who have warned me, you got to be really careful. You're running at a pretty hard pace. You've got to be careful of burnout. Family members, church folks, other pastors have warned me about this for years. And to be quite honest, my response was, yeah, I know, you're right, but it'll never happen to me until it did. And so what I'm asking of you is this. I'm asking you to graciously make the choice this morning for conclusion number 2, that you would lean in close, that you would pay attention to what my heart wants to share with you today, because I'm speaking from a place of personal experience. That's the choice I made when I got to this place in the book that we based this whole series on, a book by Carey Nieuwhof. It's called Didn't See It Coming. We've been pulling things out of that and applying them biblically. And Carey Nieuwhof, the author of that book, tells his story of burnout. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, but essentially, if you've never heard of this guy, he's like the Andy Stanley of Canada. He's got the largest, fastest growing church in Canada. In fact, he had just spoke at Andy Stanley's church in Atlanta, Georgia, to a conference of 2,500 leaders from across the country, hit a grand slam with his talk. I mean, the guy has done phenomenal things, but he's running a pretty fast pace for a long period of time, and I'm sure people spoke into his life, be careful, be careful, be careful. And in the book, he tells the story about how he lands home back in Canada, the plane lands, and after that talk, things are going amazing from a professional standpoint, and within a matter of months, he hits the wall, gets blindsided by burnout to the point where he considered running his car into a bridge. That's a pretty low place in life that burnout can take a person. Now, by the grace of God, that's not how his story ends. He's today filled with joy. God's using him to do amazing and incredible things for the glory of God. If you want to read his story, get the book. You can buy it. There's a link on our website to that book. I just want you to understand that when you see the word burnout, when you hear that we're talking about that, we are talking about something very, very serious that can take people into a place of tremendous darkness and desperation that they never imagined they could ever see themselves in. Carey Nieuwhof loves God. I love God. There are people in this room that love Jesus and that serve God with gusto and with commitment. And you need to understand that every single person in this room, including those Jesus-loving, God-fearing people that are sitting around you, maybe even you, we are all at risk, if we're not careful, of experiencing burnout. I want us to dive into the story of an Old Testament prophet, a man who loved God, a man who served God faithfully, a man who was filled with great courage and tremendous faith, and still a man like that found himself in this place of desperation, a place of absolute exhaustion, mentally, physically, relationally, emotionally, all of that complete burnout. And we're going to learn some stuff together from that. So I'm going to invite you, if you would, open your Bible to 1 Kings chapter 17. 1 Kings chapter 17 is an Old Testament book. You'll find it towards the beginning of your Bibles. If you are grabbing one of the Bibles in the pew in front of you, it's on page 265. It's interesting how the book of 1 Kings, this narrative of some of the things that were happening in the lives of the Israelites through the perspective of their leadership. And Elijah kind of shows up out of nowhere. It's kind of interesting how the narrative, he just kind of shows up. There's not a lot of backstory to his life or why he all of a sudden just appears. But in chapter 17, he just seems to appear out of nowhere, and we don't know a lot about his background. What we do know from reading through his story in 1 Kings and the 2 Kings, what we do know is this. We know that he's from this like backcountry type place, and there's some other descriptives that are used of the way that he dresses throughout the narrative. When I imagine Elijah, based on the information that we do have, this is how I imagine him. I imagine him as one of the Robertson guys, you know, kind of that backwoods, kind of long beard, you know, kind of in-your-face personality. That's kind of probably nothing like that, maybe, I don't know. But this is what I imagine when I read the story. What I do know is this. We know that Elijah was living in a time in history in which the spiritual condition of Israel had completely tanked. Just nationally, their spiritual lives had tanked. And the reason that happened had a lot to do with the leadership at that time. They were being led by a king. His name was Ahab. Ahab married a Phoenician girl named Jezebel. And between the two of them, they had led the nation of Israel away from worshiping the one true God into worshiping the Phoenician god Baal. Baal, if you've never heard of that false god, they believed that Baal was the god of the rain and the bountiful crop. And as long as Baal's happy, then we're going to have rain and we're going to have a bountiful crop. And that's who Ahab and Jezebel, that's the false god that they had been leading people to worship. And what's interesting in the story is that for about 6 months, it hadn't been raining. Now, in their theology, that would mean either Baal's dead or Baal's mad. Something's going on. In their theology, that's what the conclusion would be. And in the context or in the story, Elijah shows up kind of out of nowhere. He makes this public service announcement to everyone saying, hey, just so you know, it's not going to rain for another 3 years because you have led God's people to worship a false god. Famine hit the land, famine hit the people hard, and King Ahab is ticked off. He's looking everywhere. He's sending out people to look for Elijah because he's blaming Elijah. It's his fault. Him and Jezebel have led the people away from God, but he doesn't see it that way. He's blaming Elijah for the drought. And Elijah was hiding out in this ravine. He's got a brook that is supplying water, at least temporarily, and God has been providing food by a delivery service of ravens. It's a really cool story. You should start in just chapter 17, just work your way through the rest of the book. I really, really wanted to have, because Pastor Caleb is a Ravens fan, I really wanted to have a joke about the Baltimore Ravens stinking it up, or that they should do delivery service. I was really trying hard, but they've actually been having a good season, so I couldn't do anything with that. But if you think of something, it's too late. Don't spout it out now, okay? Eventually, the brook dries up. And God sent Elijah, I love this part of the story, he sends Elijah into this Phoenician city. And it's really, really close to where Jezebel grew up. And so this Phoenician city that he's living in, God sent him to the house of this widow who has a son. And by God's grace, he chose to bless this widow by having Elijah stay there and hide. And everyone else is starving, except God has been providing. For about 2 years, God provides miraculously food, that they don't run out of food. It's an amazing story. I hope you read it this week. I want you to take all of that background into a very famous story that probably most of you have heard. If you've been to church at all growing up, you went to Sunday school growing up, you probably have heard the story of the miracle on Mount Carmel. I want you to kind of take all of that stuff about the drought and what God's been doing in Elijah's life, take all of that information into that story where the 3 years is up and God sends Elijah back to Ahab and says, okay, it's going to rain. 3 years is over, it's going to rain. But just so you know, Ahab, that it's God who's sending the rain and not Baal, we're going to have a little competition on Mount Carmel. Here's how it's going to go. You're going to build an altar to Baal. And you're going to get all your prophets, get all of them together, and you build your altar, put the sacrifice on it. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to build one to the one true God. And you're going to go first. You're going to pray to Baal. And you're going to ask Baal to light the fire. You're not going to do it. You're going to ask Baal, pray to Baal, and have, if Baal's real, if Baal's alive, the fire will light. And I'm going to do the same. Build the altar, put the sacrifice, and I'm going to pray to my God, and I'm going to ask my God to light the fire. That's what they do. So they build the altars, and the prophets of Baal, they're carrying on all day long. with dancing and shouting, and they're cutting themselves. They're pulling out all the tricks that they know to get Baal to listen. And I love the narrative because Elijah is just kind of tormenting him, picking at him all day with a lot of sarcastic humor. And at one point, he's like, well, where's Baal? Is he in the bathroom? What's going on, right? That's the kind of stuff that he's saying to these guys as nothing's happening. And he's, all right, fine. It's done. It's obviously not going to happen. It's my turn. And remember, we're in this drought for 3.5 years. People are dying because there's not enough water. And so Elijah, he says, I'm not just going to pray and ask God to burn this up. First, we're going to take this precious resource of water, and we're going to use hundreds of gallons of it to douse the sacrifice, to douse the altar. We're going to dig a little trench around it. We're going to fill that trench with all of this water that you'd probably rather drink, but we're going to douse the sacrifice with it, and then I'm going to pray. And that's what they did. And he prayed, and God answered that prayer and rained fire down from heaven, burns up the altar, the sacrifice, the trench of water, all of it. And the prophets of Baal are all killed by the Israelites, and it starts to rain, just like God said. Jezebel apparently wasn't at Mount Carmel in the scene, so when she sees it starting to rain, she probably is thinking, hey, I guess Baal won the competition. Until Ahab shows up and tells her what happens, and that's where we want to jump into the story in chapter 19. Ahab got home, verse 1, Ahab got home. He told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, including the way he killed all the prophets of Baal. Jezebel sent this message to Elijah. May the gods strike me and even kill me if by this time tomorrow I have not killed you just as you killed them being the prophets of Baal. She sends him a death threat. Now put yourself into this place where you've experienced all of these incredible miracles by God and his provision, his protection for all of these years, this amazing miracle. You're a man of great faith or a woman of great faith, of great courage. And you get a death threat. Verse 3. Elijah was afraid and he fled for his life. He went to Beersheba, a town in Judah, and he left his servant there. By very definition, that means that the next step he takes is alone. Verse 4, then he went on alone into the wilderness, traveling all day. He sat down under a solitary broom tree. He prayed that he might die. This is what he prayed. I've had enough, Lord. I've had enough. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. If you can, your best, picture this moment. Picture this moment in Elijah's life that he is so desperate, he is so exhausted mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, that he sits down under this tree, and what he prays is that he would die. Warren Wiersbe is a very well-known Bible commentator, professor at a seminary, a guy that really knows how to explain Scripture. This is what he said about this moment in Elijah's life. Listen carefully. He says, if Elijah could have described to a counselor what he felt and what he was thinking, the counselor would have diagnosed his condition as a textbook case of burnout. And I read that and I think, man, Elijah is a man who's obedient to God. Elijah is a man who has experienced God-sized miracles in his life. He's someone who has had every need met by God. Every time there's been a challenge, every time there's been insufficient funds, God's provided. He stands up on this mountain and they have this great challenge and he comes out with an incredible victory, right? We know all of this stuff. So how is it that we get here to this verse and it says that Elijah is experiencing burnout? How did that sneak up on him? How did that happen? How did he find himself in this place I'm sure he never imagined he would be in? And beyond that, my next question is, could it happen to you? If it could happen to Elijah, could it happen to me? preface to what I'm about to tell you, I'm not a psychologist, right? And I'm not going to pretend to play one on TV. That's not who I am. And I know that these pews, we've just put new padding in them. They're probably really comfortable, I would imagine. But we're not going to lay down. It's not a couch, right? That's not what's about to happen here. It's not the psychologist's office. I'm not about to diagnose you with anything. But I have done a lot of reading about from those who live in this world, from those who do know what they're talking about, and who have, in written form, identified a number of things, a number of signs to look for if you are moving towards burnout, or maybe you're already there and you just didn't know what it was. So I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze you in this moment. I'm just going to share with you some of the signs to look for, and I'm going to ask you to honestly think about each one of them. Is that something you're experiencing? How many of them are you experiencing? Here's some of them. Your passion has faded. Your enthusiasm. Your motivation. Like you used to get up and it was like, man, there's this passion in you to go do this or that, and it's gone. There's no enthusiasm. There's no passion. It's just not there anymore. And we all get tired, right? We all get tired. We all have days like, I just can't get out of bed. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about it's just gone. There's nothing left in the tank. Or you can no longer feel the normal highs and lows of life. We all experience these amazing things that happen, the birth of a child, these incredible, devastating lows that happen with stressful situations. And it's like the normal reaction to the high, the normal reaction to the low, you kind of know what that's supposed to be, but you feel nothing. You feel numb. Nothing seems to satisfy you. Sleep doesn't do it. Prayer doesn't do it. Food doesn't do it. Like you go on vacation and it doesn't refuel you. You can't think straight because it's almost like you're in this fog and you're making dumb decisions because of it. Your productivity drops. Like even the simplest of tasks seems monumental to you. You find yourself self-medicating. It's too painful. You're not sure what to do with it, and you start to self-medicate. You know what I mean by that? Drugs, alcohol, sex addiction, food addiction. There's a ton of ways that people self-medicate. You don't laugh anymore. Like nothing, you don't find anything funny anymore. In fact, it's to the point where, other people who are enjoying life, you just want to punch them in the face. It irritates you that someone would enjoy this moment. If what I just described is your present experience, like we went through, 10 of those, and you're like 9 or 10 of those, yeah, you nailed it. That's where I am. And if you are having thoughts of hurting yourself, then please lean in close. You need to get professional help from a medical doctor, from a Christian counselor today. Today. Do you understand that Elijah was a man of great faith, a man of great courage? And as we read through his story of burnout, Elijah did not pull himself out of that place in life. What we see is that God actively intervened into his life. God is the one who stepped out and intervened and brought him into a place of spiritual, emotional, relational, physical health. He didn't do that on his own. We're talking about a man who loves God, a man who was strong and courageous and full of faith. If you need that help, you need to get it today. If we can help you in any way, get you connected, let us know. We'll help with that. But maybe, you listen to those different things and you're like, okay, I'm not like all 10. I don't feel, those thoughts. I don't have those kind of thoughts of hurting myself. But as you're going through that list, I can definitely see, I can't see the cliff from where I am, but I kind of feel like I'm moving in that direction. Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can move away from that path towards the cliff before we fall off. What are some things that we can do to heal the burnout, to begin this process of healing the burnout in our hearts that's there, and to make sure we protect our hearts from moving in a direction to a place that we don't want to be? When I originally wrote my first draft of all of this, I had 3 points to what we want to talk about today. And the more I spent time with it, the more I really felt like we need to spend time with one. So I took the 2. If you look at your notes page, there's 3 things there. We're only going to deal with 1 today. I moved the other 2 to tonight. We're going to talk about the other 2 tonight in Grace Group. We just need to talk about this one. If we can get this one thing together today, we'll have accomplished something, I think, helpful. Here it is. One thing that you and I can do, one thing that Elijah did that began the process of healing his heart from the burnout he was experiencing. One thing Elijah did that you and I can also do that will protect our hearts from that burnout or that stress or that exhaustion that's already kind of smoldering in there from getting worse. Write it down on your notes page. Move towards God. Move towards God. Do not pull away from Him. Do not try to set out on your own to do this by yourself. Move towards God. When I look at the story, I jump back into this scene, this moment in Elijah's life when he's sitting alone under this tree. He's had enough. He's exhausted. He's spent. But also notice what he does is he prays. Now his prayer is raw. His prayer is brutally honest. His prayer, quite honestly, is filled with self-pity. But Elijah prayed. Elijah chose to move towards God. And as the story unfolds, we find out he wasn't going out to find a broom tree. That was on the way to where he wanted to go. Where he wanted to go was Mount Horeb. He wanted to get to the mountain of God. He wanted to be in a place where he knew at one point the presence of God was. Because Mount Horeb is where Moses and God had this interaction. I'm imagining he's thinking, if I can get to the place where I know the presence of God was. Elijah chose to move towards God. And so I'm saying to you this one thing. Keep praying. Keep reading your Bible. Keep gathering together with other believers. Keep trusting God no matter how you feel. Because the truth about who God is, the truth about what God thinks about you, the truth about God's promises in your life, none of that changes based on what you feel emotionally. Keep moving towards God. Jesus taught us to do this in Matthew chapter 11. Please, if you would go to the New Testament in Matthew chapter 11. Listen carefully. Lean into what Jesus is about to teach us in Matthew 11:28. Jesus said, "Come to me. All of you who are weary, you are tired, you are exhausted, spiritually, emotionally, relationally, physically, you're spent. And you're carrying this heavy burden. There's this mountain of stress. You've been running really hard for an extended period of time, and it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight. Like you can't even see where the finish line might be. Come to me," Jesus said. "If you're weary, you're carrying heavy burdens, come to me and I will give you rest." And even as I say the word, there are people in the room that are like, I know I need that rest. I don't know where to find it. Jesus said, come to me. I will give you rest. Jesus said, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you. You've been learning how to deal with this from your culture. You've been learning how to deal with the problems of life from your family, from your friends. He said, no, come to me. Let me teach you. Because I am humble and I am gentle at heart. Let me teach you. And here's what he promises. You'll find rest for your soul. My yoke is easy. The burden I give you is light. You know, the most obvious way to apply what Jesus said here about rest for your soul is through trusting Jesus Christ as your forgiver of sin, your Savior from hell. Here's why it's the most obvious way to apply what Jesus said. Because you and I will never, ever find rest in our soul if we are not right with God. If we're not right with God, no rest, no peace. And so when we talk about being right with God, how does that happen? How can we be made right with God? It's through faith and trust in Jesus Christ alone as the one who died for our sin, the one who changes us at the heart level. That's the absolute first and most important step of finding rest in your soul. Are you right with God? Have you trusted Christ as your Savior? Are you choosing to live a Jesus-centered life? Are you choosing to follow Him? You know, if you know that this morning you are far from God, I don't know your heart, I don't know your story, most of you, but if you know that you are far from God, come to Jesus and find rest for your soul. Do it today. But there's another way to apply what Jesus said to our lives, and it's this. Even those of you in this room who love Jesus, you love God, you actively and faithfully serve Him, you're committed to living a Jesus-centered life. Even Jesus-loving, God-fearing Christians run at times way too fast, way too hard, for way too long. And they can get blindsided by stress and overscheduling and just the things that happen in life, and they don't know how to deal with it. And they find themselves facing burnout. And I'm going to ask you to be honest. I don't know your story. I don't know your heart. I don't know what's going on with a lot of you. But just be honest. What do you move towards when you're stressed? What is it that your heart moves towards to find comfort, to find relief, to find peace? What do you move towards? Do you move towards things like drugs and alcohol and sex and food? Is that what you move towards to try to find some satisfaction, to try to find some relief? It's not going to work. Those things are all temporary. They all wear off. When you're stressed out, when you're exhausted, do you find yourself moving towards the praise that others give you because you are really productive? The praise that others give you because you can perform really well in your job, in your schoolwork, in sports, in whatever, right? Like you crave that praise. It doesn't last. A lot of people chase after it, but it doesn't last because we're only, in the world's eyes, we're only as good as what's next. Yeah, that was great. You did that last week. Pretty good job. Yeah, nice. What are you doing next? Better be bigger. Better be better. I have this lawnmower in my backyard. I'm so sick of looking at the thing. I took it out of my shed. I don't even want to look at it. I hid it behind my camper. I hate this thing because it doesn't want to run right, and I just want to kick the thing. And so I literally put it behind our camper, out of sight, out of mind. My wife's like, "Why don't you just get it fixed?" No, I hate it. I'm not touching it. I'm not looking at it. There's a number of things wrong with it, obviously, or I wouldn't be so upset about it. One of the things that continually goes wrong with this lawnmower has got this stupid tire up front that is always losing air. Every time I go to start the lawnmower, the first thing I have to do is get the air pump out, and I have to pump this stupid tire up every time. It's fine while I'm mowing. A week later, it's flat again. Don't write me an email this week. All you have to do is get the tire fixed. Yeah, I know I can get the tire fixed. I get it. But I have it, and so it's just this constant frustration every time I mow. Now here's why I bring the story up. Because stress and overscheduling, those are the things that burn these little holes in our soul. And over time, things like love, joy, peace, patience, these things begin to leak out. And oftentimes people try to fill up the tire with all these other things. And it's okay for a while. It holds, right? You've got air in the tire for a little while, but it doesn't last. And Jesus is the one who fixes holes in our soul. He's the one who's got the power to fix the holes that need to be fixed. He says that he's going to provide rest for our souls. He says, come, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It's a farming reference to this wooden beam that you would connect two oxen together as they work the field. They would share the workload. And the burden's not all on one person, not on one animal. And when we're connected to Jesus, not only does he help share the load, but he leads us. That's why he's talking about my yoke. Take my yoke. There's an issue of leadership there. And if we follow his leadership, you know where Jesus will never lead you? Jesus will never lead you to burnout. Never. He won't lead you to burnout. That's not where he wants to take you. Jesus wants to lead you to joy and peace and satisfaction. So what's Jesus expect of us? Well, you think about some of the things that Jesus taught us about who he wants us to be and how he wants us to live life. We're talking about things like love God, love others. And there's certain boundary lines that Jesus paints for us, and he challenges us to live within these particular boundary lines. Why? Because he knows that sin destroys. He knows that sin's going to hurt your life, your family, the people around you. He doesn't want that for you. He's never going to lead you into a place of burnout. You will never hear anyone say, you know what, I can't take it anymore. I have too much love and joy in my life. I am so sick and tired of carrying this burden of so much peace and satisfaction in my soul. I'm done. No one's ever going to say that. And I think what drags most of us towards this burnout in life is this belief that we are somehow measured by the productivity and the performance standards that the world has established for us. Rather than just going back to what Jesus said. Jesus says, no, forget about that. Here's what I want for your life. I want you to love God. I want you to love others. You can play within the boundary lines here. That'll be good for you. That'll be good for your marriage. That'll be good for your family. That'll be good for your relationships with other people and your soul. Follow me, and I'll take you into a place of joy and satisfaction. And we can leave all this other nonsense of performance and productivity that the world's putting on you. Let's get rid of that. I fear that for some, that sounds very spiritual and maybe not as practical as you need. And so I'm going to be as practical as I can. Like, how do we live that out? Like, how do we, in a very, very real way, choose every day to move towards God, to move towards Jesus and let him give us rest for our soul? Well, obviously, prayer is a huge access point for us to move towards Jesus and let him give us peace and joy in our soul, for sure. But I'm going to challenge you to start asking a whole different set of questions. Just every day, ask a different set of questions than maybe what you're used to asking. It's just simply things like this. Will I, get up in the morning, start your day, will I choose to move towards God today? You're going through your day, you're doing whatever it is. Some things are working out, some things are not. And throughout the day, you're going to say, am I going to choose to move towards God in this moment? You get to the end of the day, and what a lot of us do, we kind of look back and we reflect on the day. This was good, this worked out, this didn't, this was terrible. Ask a different question. As I look back over my day, did I move towards God today? Was I just who He wanted me to be? Did I do what He wanted me to do? Okay, then I'm going to rest in that. I'm going to let Him soothe my soul, and I'm going to be satisfied that whatever I did today for Him was enough. I don't need to do anything more than that. I don't need to be anything more than that. His yoke is easy, and His burden is light. He will never, ever, ever lead you towards burnout. But you got to trust Him. He'll heal. He'll fix the holes in your soul, but you got to ask Him. You got to trust Him. Will you do that?